Is your feed suddenly featuring a day in the life of North Korean content? Do you keep hearing things in the news about North Koreans and Ukraine? Are you starting to wonder if the axis of evil is real or not real, or maybe North Korea isn't so terrible? This is for you. Hey there, this is Maggie from Non-State Actress, on a mission to make national security not boring. And there's some increasingly wild world news about North Korea that I'm to dive into. But first, I want to make sure we have some relatively basic, up-to-date knowledge. I say relatively because it is very hard to know what is happening in one of the most tightly controlled authoritarian regimes in the world. If you don't believe me, just ask my preschool buddy, Otto Warmbier. Oh wait, you can't, because he's dead. Anyways, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, which is neither democratic or a people's republic, is led by a communist dictator named Kim Jong-un. The state was previously run by his father, Kim Jong-il, and founded by his father, Kim Il-sung, in 1948. KJU, as he's called by his friends, lovers, and enemies, took power in 2011. With a population of just over 26 million people, the active duty military is about 1.3 million people. There are also approximately another 600,000 people in the reserves, and then an additional 5.7 million people in something called the Red Guard that we'll talk about in a little bit. So current estimates suggest that about 36.3% of the nation's GDP was spent on its military in 2023, which probably explains why starvation is such a problem. For reference, the United States spends about 3.5% of its GDP in this same frame of time. Does the US have a significantly larger gross domestic product? Sure. But if you have a dollar and you use 36 cents of that dollar to practice blowing things up, how are you also going to grow, harvest, store, and distribute food? Build roads and bridges and water filtration systems, fund schools and hospitals, let alone have internet and Taylor Swift. Said another way, North Korea spends more per person on military defense than it does on anything else. Wild. You can argue people can spend their money however they want, but the red flags with North Korea do not stop there. While there are elections in North Korea and voting is absolutely required for anyone over the age of 17, pre-selected candidates historically win 100% of the seats they run for. The government uses the mandatory elections as an unofficial census, tracking whether and how people voted and interpreting any rejection of the pre-selected candidates as treason. And treason is often punishable by death. There is no chance for normal, everyday North Koreans to get involved in the political process, and only elite members of the KWP or Korean Workers' Party are a part of this wildly rigged system. And it isn't like life is rainbows and butterflies or even compromises for them. Elites are regularly purged, and even super senior officials are executed when Kim Jong-un decides he doesn't really like them anymore. There is dramatic evidence of physical and sexual violence against women, forced abortions, especially when women become pregnant while on state-led work contracts to China, and the infanticide of half-Chinese children. Forced labor abounds in prison camps, through mass mobilization efforts, which is where basically the government comes to your town and says, 1,000 people are leaving with us today. Show up or we'll take you by force. And through state-run contracts where people are sent around the world against their will as slave labor. These practices fall under a more commonly heard term, human trafficking. But TikTok makes it look so nice. When it comes to LGBTQ rights and protections in North Korea, it's apparently a non-issue. Why? Because according to the North Korean government, such people do not exist in their country. I could go on and on and on about how life in North Korea makes Big Brother look like a trip to Disney, and I probably should, but then this video would never end. And like other millennials with a bizarre level of familiarity with world events from my earliest years, I can't remember a time when words North Korea weren't followed almost immediately by nuclear programs. Even still, it's kind of hard to figure out what the military of a country that cannot and will not feed its people looks like, and that is what I want to focus on now. So, ever committed to branding itself as for the people, the KPA, or Korean People's Army, includes KPA Ground Forces, KPA Navy, KPA Air Force and Air Defense Forces, KPA Strategic Forces, which is like missiles and nukes, plus an estimated 200,000 special forces, which is among the largest SF contingent in the world, a security guard command, which is basically responsible for Kevin Costnering Kim Jong-un and his family as if he is Whitney Houston, aka a bodyguard command, and a military security command. The majority of KPA members are conscripts, like draftees at any given time. Every North Korean is required to serve at 17 years of age. The length of obligation varies dramatically depending on gender, what your responsibility is, etc. And given how limited opportunities are for employment, food, money, etc., it isn't surprising so many conscripts stay on after their initial service obligation. Reports suggest that as many as 20% of North Korean men between the ages of 16 and 54 are in the military at any given time, and possibly up to 30% of men between the ages of 18 and 27. There's also evidence that about 20% of the KPA troops are women, so it sounds like they don't have a problem with women in combat. There is also a Ministry of Social Security, which used to be known as the Ministry of Public Security. It is more squarely focused on keeping North Koreans in North Korea, enforcing the authoritarianism on everyone, every second of every day, and guarding the border. There is also, of course, a Ministry of State Security, which is mostly about investigating one another. And on top of all of this, there's a pretty robust intelligence apparatus that exists in, around, and with everything else. So with a military this big, you might think that the environment is really ripe for a take down Regina George moment. But it is way more complicated than that. First, you have a nation of people who effectively have no access to outside information. They exist in a world that is built to keep them in fear of any entity outside of the leadership of the Korean Worker Party, aka the Kim family. The propaganda is propagandizing hard. I really can't even go there right now, but you're seeing it on TikTok. So let me put it this way. Having seen some of the search terms of the 10,000 North Koreans sent to Russia and now have access to the internet, yeah, they're looking at a lot of porn, and wow, is there a lot they do not know. Anyway, another reason North Korea is not the nation state on the Korean peninsula in the news for a coup is structural. North Korea's military is set up very differently than the US's, or really anywhere that isn't a violent dictatorial regime. And I'm not just talking about civilian control of the military. It is our understanding that North Korea's security apparatus is intentionally redundant, meaning you have several departments or forces with overlapping authority and responsibilities. Awful does not begin to describe the workplace culture we are talking about here, folks. Not only does this prevent efficiency, it absolutely prevents one person from consolidating power, or really any sense of self, and offers a built-in reporting mechanism. Basically, it's not just incentivizing, but requiring each person to monitor, track, and report on their counterparts at the individual and organizational level. Sneaky, right? While the command and control structure isn't as alarming on paper as you might think, the chaos is in the details. And by details, I mean the worker, peasant, Red Guard, and Red Youth Guard I sort of mentioned a little while ago. And yeah, it's red because communism. So this is a paramilitary group of almost 6 million North Koreans, including children, and they're under the control of the Korean Workers' Party. They become part of the KPA forces when KJU tells them to. So said another way, the political party has a trained paramilitary group that makes up more than 20% of the entire population. All right, so that's the people. What do we know about how this military is equipped? I am so glad you asked, because North Korea can't just go to the weapons mall and put in an order for an MRAP thanks to UN sanctions. There's definitely some BlackBerry Pearl era vibes and probably a greater than zero number of iPhone level capabilities, but I don't think we're talking iPhone 16 here. Mostly, we're looking at Cold War and later. The majority of North Korean weapon systems that are not domestically produced, more on this in a minute, are either old systems from the former Soviet Union or stuff from Russia or goodies from China. There is also some Iranian products in there, but honestly, North Korea is basically just getting high on its own supply. We know North Korea makes small arms, munitions, light armored vehicles, tanks, naval vessels and submarines, and some advanced weapon systems like cruise and ballistic missiles. How do we know this? We know this because we see them use them, and they sell them to other militaries. Designs seem to be based on older foreign supplied equipment and then upgraded. There's also some evidence that North Korea gets its hands on new products through various illicit systems, like weapons trafficking, intelligence operations, and then replicates. And then, of course, there are countries like Russia, China, Iran that will sell to them. So, how functional is this technology, and how good are all of these people at actually militarying? Honestly, it's hard to know for now. Since the armistice of the Korean War, which separated North and South Korea in 1953, the North Korean government has definitely used its military and intelligence forces, but in limited and targeted ways, favoring more like subversive terrorist tactics, mostly against South Koreans and its own people. There's been some attempted sea guerrilla warfare, including the loss of at least two subs and another like partial underwater boat thing. And many Americans are familiar with repeated nuclear weapons tests over the last 20 years, poop balloons, and assassinations of KWP elites, including members of the leading family, aka the Kims, in public places like airports. So, to summarize here, we know that the North Korean military is enormous. It is the fourth largest in the world after China, India, and the United States, despite having less than 10% of the size of the US's population, and that this enormous military is intentionally designed to protect the leader, not the country. As a reminder, in the US, you swear allegiance to the Constitution, not a person. And we know that despite sanctions and other international mechanisms, North Korea continues to find ways to equip that enormous military and progress technologically while still starving its own people. Said another way, time does march on for North Korea. And if world news and our social media algos tell us anything, it's that we're about to learn a whole lot more about North Korea, at least at the same time as 10,000 North Koreans are learning about porn. Come back for part two of this non-state actress series on North Korea, which is basically like VH1 Behind the Music, or maybe that was MTV. I don't know. But I'll be covering North Korea's participation in Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine. And in the interim, please like and share and subscribe to my cute little channel. I promise I will remember to record the closer for real next time.